Important. This can. Hello. Nimeshatuma lakini naweza tuma tena. Iko hapo. Iko hapo. Hello. So we start on, it's okay to start at 7:03? Okay. Okay. So good morning. Good morning. I hope you can hear me. Okay, thank you very much. I wish to start with today's lesson. So today's lesson is on study skills. It will be done by Rosalind Wambo-Inyaga as indicated on the slides. This is one of the skills that you should learn, or if not, you already have some skills, so I hope you perfect it by the end of the course. So I'll go straight on to the introduction. So often at the university, students confuse studying with reading or preparing for exams or doing assignments. And this is a misconception that we wish to address in this lecture, that there is a difference between studying and reading and even preparing for exam. That when you're reading, you're not necessarily studying. So the aim of this topic is to help you think about and plan the way you should study and improve your studying, revision, examination techniques, etc. So our lesson objectives: by the end of the lesson, the learner should be able to define studying. You should be able to explain the difference between studying, reading, and preparing for exams in college. You should be able to prepare a study schedule, or what you'd call a study timetable. You should be able to identify effective study habits. And then you should be able to form a study group. I know you're already working in groups for your CCS 101 assignments. How effective are these groups? We shall look at how your groups are working and see how to form a study group. And then you also need to learn how to organize your notes, whether they're handwritten. This would be in notebooks or in note cards. But you can also decide to digitize your notes. How would you do this? Students often procrastinate, maybe doing reading or doing assignments. What are the negative influences of procrastination? And then with all this, you should be able to prepare and take exams efficiently. So that is basically what we intend to do today. So I'll go to the next slide. Definition. So what are study skills? So some people refer to study skills as academic skills or study strategies. And study skills are basically approaches that you apply to learning. At the end of the day, learning is the end result. So what skills are you supposed to apply for you to learn? So study skills include an array. There are different skills that tackle the process of organizing. How do you organize your notes? How do you take in new information? How do you retain this information for later recall? And even how do you deal with exams? So study skills or study strategies covers quite a broad area, from taking in new information to how you organize your notes, to how you can recall this information and how you can deal with exams. So any skill which boosts a person's ability to study, retain and recall information, and which can assist in passing exams is referred to as study skill. And it goes on to even include time management. How do you manage your time in campus? And even motivational techniques. How do you motivate yourself to read or to study when basically most of the college students are interested maybe in entertainment? So all this revolve around study skills. So it's a broad process, from organizing to taking in to recall to doing exams. So now we move on to the differences between, because our second objective was that you should be able to differentiate between reading and studying. Most of the time at the college, at the university, you find students will study or read when there's a cut around the corner, or when the exams are around the corner. So we want to differentiate what is studying and what is reading. So I have to start by saying that reading and studying are both very important in the learning circle. They're interdependent, but you can do them together, but they are different. They differ in many ways. So reading and studying differ in many ways. So I'll define reading. Reading refers to scanning or making sense of information. Scanning or making sense of information. But remember that we have various types of reading styles. And I think that will be covered in the 8th lecture. So I will not go deep into reading because that will be covered. You'll be taught on the different types of reading. While studying requires cognitive skills to gather, to store, and also to comprehend information. So when you're studying, you want to research, gather information. Then how do you store this information and even understanding the information? So when you're studying, the mind has to actively engage. So look at how Merriam-Webster defines studying. So studying means you read in detail, especially with the intention of learning. And then you should, as you read, you're contemplating. What does the author mean? What does that mean? Is this possible? So as you read, you're also actively contemplating and reflecting on what you're reading. And then that means as you're reflecting and contemplating on what you're reading, that means you're applying your mental faculties to the acquisition of knowledge. And then you will also have to memorize the information that you are reading. So reading will take in several things. So your main purpose is to learn and also memorize the information, but you're also reflecting and contemplating on what exactly it is that you are reading with a view of learning. I'll go to the next slide. Let us look at differences between studying and reading. So there are several differences between studying and reading. Studying is the interaction embraced by a person where a total dedication of time is needed to completely comprehend and to get a handle on a specific idea. While reading is an interaction of going through a point inside a provided subject. The subject could be maybe CCS, with a view of getting data from it. So when you compare studying to reading, there's more dedication, both in time and even energy, to when we study than when we read. And then studying now will incorporate or will involve you explore. So you're reading a lot on the same area. You're reading from different areas, exploring. Then as you read, you're contemplating and with a view of learning at the end. But once we give assignments that require reading, mostly people will scrutinize through writings and then understand the idea. So in studying, the third difference, recalling is fundamental. Or in studying, you have to remember what you are reading. While in reading, remember I've said there are different types of reading that you will look at. Recalling may not be that fundamental, but more pivotal is understanding. But in studying, recalling is important. Then studying is received when attempting to comprehend complex themes or subjects, while reading is reasonable for less unpredictable themes and subjects that you are acquainted with. So you should be able to differentiate between studying and reading. But I think when I get to the next slides, when we look at exactly what is studying, you should be able to get the difference. So now we want to look at types of study skills, otherwise called study strategies. So how basically what we are trying to learn is how do you study? How do you study? You cannot, we are not saying that you incorporate all these study skills to your study, but you should find out what works best for you. What works best for you among these study skills. And mostly it depends on your learning style. Later in the slide, we shall look at various learning styles because your learning style is basically what will help you decide which is your study skills. So there are various types of study skills. One of them is rehearsal and rote learning. This is what basically people will do a few days to the exams. It's basically what people call cramming. So you memorize. So memorization is a process of committing something to memory. So mostly students at campus will pick their notes and rote learn. So they are trying to commit to memory what they have learned with the name of reproducing it in the exam. So the act of memorization is often a deliberate mental process undertaken in order to store information in one's memory for later recall. But there is a weakness to rote learning. Because when you rote learn, or when you cram, that is what we call it, basically this is it's passive reading. Most of the time, you're not even interested in understanding what the material is saying. You just want to commit it to memory. So it's a passive reading and listening style. And educators such as John Dewey argue that students need to learn critical thinking. As you even read these notes that the lecturers give to you, ask yourself, what does it mean? Contemplate, reflect. Is it possible? For example, if we are teaching about elements of communication, try to imagine scenarios and what are the elements in those communication scenarios. So instead of rote learning, we should switch to critical thinking, where we question, we weigh up evidence as we learn. So, and critical thinking is not only done when you're reading notes, also when during lectures. Even as a lecturer lectures, you should be thinking about what the lecturer is giving us. So, rote learning has a weakness because it is passive, and often the material that is learned through rote learning is often forgotten. Mostly after the exams, if you ask the learners what they had rehearsed, most of them cannot remember. So this is not a very good study skill. So the other one, this is another skill called reading and listening. And it has two methods, or I wish to discuss two methods that one can use. The first one is REAP method. And this mostly helps you to understand a text. And REAP is an acronym for one, read. So you read a section to understand an idea. So you read, then you encode. Encoding basically means paraphrasing or trying to put it in your own, what you have read, you try to put it in your own words, or you try to paraphrase to your words from the author's perspective to your own words. If you can paraphrase an author's idea, this aid with understanding. It means that you have understood the content and you can even say it in your own words. Often when we mark exams, you find questions answered in exactly the learner's words. So that means basically what people do is rote learn. But you should understand this content in a way that you can even say it in your own words. So after you encode, then the next thing is you annotate. So annotate means you will take notes from maybe from different authors or from different books. You can even get what different people say about the same subject that you're reading about. So annotation, you annotate the section that you have read with critical understanding. You can even do conclusions of what you have understood from what you are covering with other relevant notes. Then P means you ponder. Remember, I've said critical thinking, you're reflecting, you are contemplating. So you ponder about what they read through thinking. And then now you can even take up the discussion with other members. Now here you are talking about what you read and exchanging ideas. And then you also read other related materials. So this is a good way of studying, where you read, then you paraphrase, then you annotate, and then you reflect or think through what you have read. Another skill, another way to read would be to use the Pqrst method. So the P means preview. The Q means question, then read, then summary, then you test. This is a very good method of understanding what you are reading. So basically, you go through the headlines, you glance through a book looking at the headings or the subheadings, and then from the subheadings, you write down, you formulate questions. Once you formulate these questions, you now read the material. So you now read the material, and basically you're focusing on gauging information that you can answer the questions you have formulated. And then once you read, you summarize the topic. You summarize your topic, and we look at ways to summarize. It could be, people use spider diagrams. This is where you do like a web. This is for things like S's, where one thing builds into another one. Or you can do a flow diagram, maybe for people who are doing chemistry or IT. I think we could have content that would work with this. Or you do diagrams, or you do mnemonics. So we look at mnemonics later in the material. Then after you've done your summary of what you've read, you finally test. So you answer the questions that you had drafted. There's nothing as good as self-testing. This really helps with the understanding of material. When you formulate questions and read, then answer those questions, that means you have understood. So another study skill is the use of flashcards. This is very good for people who have a visual learning style. We will look at learning styles later, as I said. So if you know you are a visual person, you learn well, material well, that is on maybe written down, you when you see it. So you can make flashcards or index cards. So from your notes, maybe that you take down in class, you go back and sit down and do flashcards or index cards. And they can be A5 size, where you do, and each of these A5 should have different topics or different subtopics. So each subtopic is done on a separate paper. And why is this advantageous? Because you can separate what you want to study. You can reorder the material in the way you want to study, and you can reorder them on how difficult it is. If you want to start with most difficult and then move on to what is easier for you. So if you do your note summaries on flashcards, basically you can use A4 papers. Then you can rearrange the selection, sections, and you can reorder the sections and read them as per the order you want to do. You can also do these flashcards on our softwares, and I will show you later when we look at the digital notes. The other one is summary methods. Often after attending class, because the notes are, there's a large amount of information. So after your classes, you can now sit down and do summary. So this is where you condense the large amounts of information into shorter notes. And you can even condense them further to key facts. So if you have to embrace these study skills, that means you're reading throughout the semester. This is not something that you can embrace the last week to exam. That would mean you are reading through all from week 1 to the end. So how do we summarize? Some people use outlines. Some people use a tree structure. There are subjects that there is content that would allow that. Some people use spider diagrams, or some people who are good with visuals can use mind maps. Mind maps is where you different what would I call them? Different, you note down different ideas from the subject that you are looking at in form of like a map from stage 1 to the last stage. So these are different ways of summarizing. So you can use, mostly people will use outlines, but some people cannot. You can also use a tree or a spider diagram like a web or a mind map. So these tools can give a visual summary of a topic that preserves its logical structure. So as we look at these study skills, keep reflecting or pondering what would work, what works for you, or which one have you embraced so far and it has worked for you. So that then you pick what can work for you. Now, some people use visuals. You have seen some people, especially like I've seen it for investigators, like in criminal investigative movies that I watch, they will do the evidence that they have on a wall. That is because they are using this visual. So some learners are thought to have a visual learning style, especially if you're doing maybe IT or the sciences. I think visuals, imagery can work. So the information is verbal, but then it's done down. Now, this is a way to learn. You use visual techniques to help you encode. Remember, to encode, now you are trying to paraphrase and also to retain it in your memory. So you move from verbal or written information, and then you move it to visual. And this is to help you paraphrase and understand. So a popular visual is method of loci, where you put the information around a room. You put the information around a room. Then some people also learn very well with diagrams. Diagrams can be used to bring all the information together, and then you reorganize what you have learned in diagram, probably for people doing geography or sciences again. So diagrams will aid in recalling information. Or if not diagrams, you can do pictures. So if you are a visual person, this would be an idea. Then another study skill or study strategy is the use of acronyms and mnemonics. So a mnemonic is a method of organizing and memorizing information, and there are 4 types of mnemonic. The first one is a narrative. It relies on a story. The other one is textual. This is one that is very common, sonic or textual. This is where we use a rhythm or repeated sound, such as rhyme or memorable textual pattern, or such as acronyms. For example, my field is linguistics. So like to remember the word order of adjective, we use CCS, where S is for size, the second for shape, age, color, origin, material, and purpose. So if you have material that you want to commit to memory, you can come up with an acronym to help you remember that information. So others would be visual diagrams, and then the other one would be topical. Another type of mnemonic is topical. Now, this is where you use features of a familiar place or room or landmark as a way of coding and recalling sequenced facts. So you use what is familiar as a code to remember sequenced fact. For example, while way back, I think in primary, we would use the cardinal points to recall the cardinal points. You know, at that early age, even learning the cardinal points or the compass direction was an issue. So we learned the compass direction using the phrase, naughty, elephants, splash, water. Where naughty was for north, and elephant was for east, splash was for south, and water was for west. So you can come up with such acronyms and mnemonics to help you remember information, especially facts that are short. You can be remembered using acronyms and mnemonics. So mnemonics is basically a sound pattern. So where you come up with maybe rhyming words that can help you remember. So class activity. I wonder if anyone can come up with an acronym or a mnemonic for elements of communication, or maybe for the 7 C's of communication. If it's for the 7 C's of communication, what acronym or mnemonic can we remember? the consistency, clarity. Can we come up with a mnemonic or acronym for the same? I've seen when marking exams, I've seen learners struggling with the elements of communication. A question is very direct and asks you to discuss the elements, or a question requires you to discuss the 7 C's of communication, and you have trouble remembering, you could come up with an acronym or mnemonic to do the same. That is just an idea. Try it. So another study skill, and remember we said studying is an array of skills that where the end result is learning. So studying will also include how do you retrieve materials and how do you test. So a lot of scholars or educators recommend self-testing or self-quizzing. Self-testing or self-quizzing. So before you even get to do the cards or to do the exam, set questions from your material that you're reading and see if you can answer these questions or tests that aid in understanding the content. So self-testing, problem solving, like even in mathematics, you would know a formula. If you want to learn that, you'd have to solve a problem. Or active recall method, like we've talked about, flashcards and others. Next slide. We are still on study skills. So study skill will include management of time. Because for a student at the university, you really have to learn how to manage your time if you want to do any studying. Remember, we are discouraging last-minute rote learning, hours or days to the exam. People should study throughout campus. I know that sounds ambitious, but that is what should happen. And we have the advantages of having Wi-Fi on campus. So rather than spend our time listening to music or watching movies or chatting, we could delve into the academia or academic world, study, research on these items. You have role models on campus, maybe your lecturers. Find out what field they are in. You never know. It could open up a world for you that would be helpful later after graduation. So time management is part of study skills. And of course, time management, but also having enough sleep, and also your emotional state of mind. Because if you are not at a good place emotionally, this will disrupt your studying. So when do we study? Some people study well in the morning, some are hours, some study in the night. Some are very good, some will study comfortably in the afternoon. So look at what works best for you. Although people have argued that productivity is greater earlier in the day for some people, but not for all. Research suggests that material studied in the afternoon or evening is better consolidated and retained. So would this work for you? Material that you study in the afternoon or evening, is it retained for you? So find out which is your learning style. Do you study well in the morning, in the afternoon, or in the night? Then establish a routine. Brains like routine. For example, if you train yourself to study every 8 p.m., every 8 p.m. now your brain and your body will be ready for study. So manage your time. You're the one who can only decide what free time you have, but I must insist that more time, we must look for time every day to study. Now, studying environment. Where do we study from? An environment can mean many things. It could mean location, or it could mean sounds, to smells, to background music. Some people study very well in a noisy room, or even when the neighbor is playing very loud music. Others cannot study with music. They need a very quiet place. Maybe the library would do for them. So Some people would study very well next to the road where there are so many distractors in form of vehicles and persons. So which works for you? So some people are able to study with music, although some studies show that there is a detrimental effect to listening to lyrical, especially popular music, because uh, because it will affect your memorization, because you're listening to lyrical music where you can actually recognize the lyrics. This will deter what you're learning. But other studies show that music is a good thing when studying. They argue that music has a positive effect on the human brain, which is beneficial when you are studying. That music will activate both sides of the brain, the one that you're reading on and the other one. So when you activate both sides of the brain, this allows you to maximize your learning and improve your memory. Other people argue that reading while listening to music reduces stress. So it decreases blood pressure and your heart rate and your anxiety level, which is a great asset when reading. So again, find out what works for you. Are you one who reads in a quiet place, or are you one who would read next to very loud music? Find out what works for you and embrace it. So next, we look at so I want to look at the next subtopic, which is how to study or effective study habits. So effective study habits, find a time and a place to study regularly. So remember, we said it is important that we establish routines. The brain likes routine. So find a time. So if you study every day at 8 p.m., that should become a routine. So find time and also a place to study. Once you establish a place that suits you, then you should stick to that place. So consistency is key when it comes to studying. So do your best to make it a habit. So find a spot on campus where you're comfortable and even inspired to study. And the environment should be what works for you. Schedule specific times schedule specific time throughout the week for your study time. Try to study at the same time each day. Okay, so it will establish a routine that becomes a regular part of your life. And we are first years, we should be able to embrace this, and once we make it part of us, then we'll comfortably study throughout the 4 or 5 years that we are supposed to be on campus. So we need to keep track of deadlines and important dates. For example, over and over again, we have takeaway assignments that are brought in late. So keep track of your deadlines. We have app that can do that. Write down dates for assignments, for exams, and other events. So remember, time management is part of studying skills. Don't cram for your exams. Don't cram for your exam, because when you cram, you're trying to get a lot of information into your mind within very limited time. Instead, review material in smaller chunks over a longer time span. So every day after class, sit down and review your notes. So read small chunks over a longer time span. This is more effective than trying to cram a ton of materials once exams are announced. Organize a study group. Some people's learning style is that they are interpersonal, or they work well in groups. I know you're already doing your assignments. I mean, your tutorials, presentations in groups. Probably you didn't have much choice when forming these groups because you had to find 15 members for these groups. But for your studying, if you know you work well as a group, there are some people who are alone, they study alone. They're good when you study alone other than in a group. So if you do well, if you thrive as a group, then form or organize a study group. Okay? It might be easier to learn materials if you can discuss ideas with your classmates. So during these first years, give study groups a try. So I will look later, we shall see how to form a study group. And I think during the next lecture, when we look at when we look at collaboration, group dynamics will be discussed. Like probably what are some of the challenges that you're having in your groups? Remember, these are different personalities of 15. 15 is a huge number because 15 is not easy to manage 15 people. So late, I think it will be discussed further in this work and also in next week's lecture. Now, another good study habit is when you review your notes after class. And remember, this CCS 101 is not a teach for exam kind of course, but it's more of teach for life. These are still skills that we must embrace in our academics. So learn to sit down at the end of every day and review what you learned that day. I know I'm being ambitious, but this is actually possible. It is possible to sit down and review your notes after each class. So when you go through your notes, it improves your memory and it will also help you learn more effectively. So another good study habit would be to set specific goals. So set specific goals. And these would be short-term goals. For example, short-term goals would be you have a cut in a week. That is a short-term goal. Or you have exams in a few weeks. Or what are your long-term goals? Probably you want to finish a degree in this year, you want to do a diploma by the time, So write down your goals. This will help you remain focused. Avoid procrastination. Often when we are given assignments, we will shelve it until the lecturer reminds us that, oh, I'm picking my assignments next week. Then now we start to run around. Avoid procrastination. So study when you had planned. So why do people procrastinate? Probably because they don't like an assignment or they think it's too hard. So a delay in studying is called procrastination. If you procrastinate for any reason, what will happen? One, you will find it difficult to get everything done when you need to. For example, if you remember your 5 assignments a week to when they are due, that means time will not be enough and you find it difficult to get everything done. And two, what will happen? You may rush. You will rush to make up for time wasted getting started, and this will result in careless work and errors. So as we do our takeaway assignments, and remember, like in my class, I've been insisting that these takeaway assignments must be done. We must get an introduction. We must get the content. I'm even expecting that you do, if you are doing research, that you cite your sources and you do a reference. So take time. Do not procrastinate doing this assignment. As soon as they are issued to you, tackle them, and especially those that you think are difficult, because they require more effort. Start with what you deem difficult, because this is when you have the most mental energy. So avoid procrastinating in your studies. So let's go back to study groups. So one of the objectives today was form a study group. Form a study group. And I've said study, there are many advantages of study groups. Okay? So you are able to engage in thoughtful discussions with your classmates. This will enhance your understanding of course material. You also get to learn new study methods, like the study group. If you're used to studying alone, maybe the study group would expose you to new studying methods that suit your learning style. You never know. You could be the interpersonal. That could be you have interpersonal learning skills. So again, if you meet regularly with your group, it can also reduce procrastination as you prepare for exams and assignments. So study groups are important. And apart from the groups that you're working with for class, maybe you should look for people who have the same goals and form study groups to study. So these are the tips to starting a successful group. The first very important decision is deciding who is in the group. Most of the time, we'll pick our friends as members. But this this is not the best idea. Because working with friends looks easy, but it's not always productive. So don't be in a rush to pick your friends for your study groups. There are other factors that should go into your consideration of who exactly is in your study group. So, one, you have to make sure that the group members are interested in getting the work done and are also able to focus in a group setting. Okay? Because some of the time, I'm sure we meet for groups and nothing ends up being done. Instead, we end up maybe talking or telling stories throughout the group time. So, work or look for people or group members who share a common goal. And this means your group will be productive. How many members should go into a group? Probably 5 or 6. A larger group would means will be hard to manage. For example, 15 members finding time at the same time to meet. Even managing the group of 15 members, I know is quite a tough, tall order on you. But it's because of the large number the group has. So maybe 3 to 6 or 3 to 5 members would work well for a group. So remember, you must have a common goal, not necessarily your friends, so that this group can be productive. And then remember, we are looking at forming a productive study group. If you decide that interpersonal learning style works for you and you want to form a group, then that means you have to take initiative and form the group. Most likely you'll become the leader. Most likely you'll become the leader, and people will expect you are the one who will keep everyone in the loop. So this could mean creating a group, a WhatsApp group, or doing a text to tell members when to meet, or updating members on regular meeting times. So you'll also have to decide how often do you need to meet, specific dates and time, and even venue for where to meet. So decide who is in the group. Then 2, take the initiative and form the group. Then 3, pick a good study space. Decide where your group should meet. So remember, it should have minimal or limited distractions and enough space to accommodate all of your group members. So some campuses have spaces in the library where groups can discuss, or it could be in an open field, or you decide which is a good place or space for you. And again, with Wi-Fi on campus, people are even meeting virtually. It's amazing what the possibilities that having Wi-Fi on campus offers us. So take advantage of this Wi-Fi. You could do virtual meetings where group members can easily connect from wherever they are and collaborate on assignments, or if it's just discussing new materials. So, and we have spaces like Google Hangout, and we also have Skype. Please embrace these spaces, virtual spaces, for your group discussions. And remember, it's not only for takeaway assignments, it can also be to study for exam. You need to set the ground rules. Once you form a group, what are the rules of operation? So that means, because you need to keep everyone on the same page. Remember, we have a common goal. So what is this goal? You have to agree on some ground rules, such as even use of phones. You will meet for groups and you will tell us your challenges. Next week, I think when we do collaboration, we'll look at group dynamics and some of the challenges that you're going through in your groups. There is this member who constantly has a phone out and is chatting as group work is going on, and you have to keep recapping the material for him or her. So you need to come up with ground rules that phones should be silent, or we shouldn't have our phones, or about members being uncooperative and unresponsive. Mostly when we give takeaway assignments in group work, you can tell some people, some members' contribution is only giving their names and registration number, that they did not take part in any of those of that group discussion. So ensure you set the rules. Every member must cooperate. And most of these takeaway assignments will find their way into their exam. And you see an assignment that was done as a group and we were able to score very highly. But when it comes to the exam, that question cannot be tackled by most people. So it tells us that the group discussions assignments were not productive. So ensure you set ground rules. Everyone should cooperate. Then create a plan. Once you set the rules, you create a plan. So, for example, how long will be each session? What are you going to discuss? Do you need to meet when the exam is coming up? What is the agenda beforehand? etc. So create a plan for these groups. I'm done with the group. So I hope that this gives you tips on how to form groups. I'm saying probably the ones you are in, you didn't have much option. But when you're forming study groups, ensure you pick members whose goal is common so that it can be productive in the end. And ensure the numbers are between 5, 3 and 6, or 3 and 5. And then ensure you set ground rules and that everybody knows what is the plan. So I move on to the next subtopic. One of the objectives was that by the end of the lecture, you should be able to form a study schedule or a timetable. I wonder if we have study timetables so far, or this is something we had in high school, and once we got to campus, that was forgotten. We must understand that in campus, especially if you want to be an academia, the information is more in depth, and probably you need to do more research. So it would be important to form a schedule or a timetable. Remember, I've said, do not wait for the last hours to exams and start reading. Make it a habit every day. Look for an hour or two to study. So how do you make a study schedule? The first thing you do is you identify your short-term and long-term goals. And I said short terms could be doing a cut in 2 weeks, or finishing an assignment in a week, or if you're supposed to do a presentation, probably for those doing sciences, this could be your short-term goals. But long-term goals, what are your long-term goals? Some people want to do a diploma, additional diploma, or they want to do a degree. These are long-term goals. So probably you want to, get a first class, probably get a scholarship. These are long-term. So identify your short-term and long-term goals. And then at the university, list all the subjects that you need to study. So if you have 5 units, you list them down. And then after listing down the units that you need to study, you can prioritize your list. And you can prioritize your list depending on probably material that you consider difficult. Probably there are units that you are struggling with. Probably the information is new, or something is just technical for you. So you need to prioritize your list. So rank each maybe subject or unit in its importance. Okay? Figure out what subjects or units you need to devote the most time and the best time slots. Remember, I said decide if you're a morning person or night or afternoon. So if something is technical or difficult, probably you could give it more time and maybe your morning slots. Then the next thing, you divide your available time during the week into study blocks. So you can use an app for this or you can use a calendar. So 5 days a week, which is your available time to study. So divide it into study blocks. For example, if you are doing 7 to 9, 2 hours every evening, or if you're doing a morning 5 to 7, you block this. This is your available time every week. Then assign a unit to every block. So if you can study 4 hours in a day, that will mean you'd have 2 blocks for that day. If it's 1 block. So decide the blocks that you have, then assign subjects to these blocks. And that is your study schedule. So basically, that is how to make a study schedule. Your goals. What subjects do you need to study? What is your priority list? And then what time do you have available? Remember, we cannot recommend a study schedule for everyone because we don't know how much time each has, but try to give at least 2 to 4 hours every day. Then block it and then put the units that you need to study there. Or you can even go further and do topical blocks where you divide or you block the available times into the topics that you have to handle. Remember, this is not something that we can do a week to exam. That would mean if you're studying throughout your semester. Another topic, that subtopic, is that you must learn. Another objective is learning how to organize your notes. And your notes can be handwritten or it can be digital notes. How do you organize your notes? Let's begin with your handwritten notes. How do we organize them? So, one, you need to keep your notes short. Remember, most of the time, your notes will condense will have a lot of information. For example, for subunits like maybe in the humanities. Remember, we said a way to learn would be to condense these notes into summaries. So this will help you have lesser content to cover. Remember, when you're condensing your notes into summaries, would mean you take down the main points. Or if you're doing notes for yourself, then keep your notes short. I often see learners struggling to take word for word what the lecturer is saying. Remember, we said, even as we listen to these lectures, you are critically thinking. You're not writing everything that the lecturer is saying. You are writing down what is important. So your brain should be alert. Take down what is important and not word for word. So keep your notes short. Write neatly. Remember, we are looking at handwritten notes. Write neatly. Get organized. So getting organized is finding a way to organize your notes. So some people will have different notebooks for each class. Others will have maybe a 3-ring binder where you put a tab. This is CCS 101. This is chemistry, analytical chemistry. So you could have a ring binder where you separate the units with tabs, or you could have separate notebooks for each class. Some people write on foolscaps and then file them. So ensure that your file is well organized. This will help when you have to retrieve the material. For example, if it's for an exam, you can easily retrieve your material and it will not stress you out as you are reading. So here is where you develop a system. Remember, again, I keep saying your brain craves a routine. So find a system for your notes. Find a system for your notes. How some people love to use color. other people love to, there are various ways people use to make their notes. Find out what works best for you. Then the other one is, as you're organizing these notes or as you're taking down these notes, minimize distractions. Most of us are not able to put away our phones even when we are studying. So you're doing down your notes, and every 30 seconds you're glancing at your phone. This chart has, for this chart, or to music, or, So minimize distractions as you do your notes. Because every time, every moment, every momentary glance over to social media is a second that you aren't actually listening or reading. Okay? So try to minimize distractions as we work on this. So that is how to organize your handwritten notes. And then number 5 is repeated, using space meaningfully. Have you ever seen people who cram up work margin to margin on their notebooks? Once you cram your notebook margin to margin, your work does not even have paragraphs. It doesn't look like even it has paragraph breaks. This discourages one from reading. So use space meaningfully. So there's nothing so daunting at exam time as a notebook that is crammed wall to wall within the tiny text. It looks all the same. There's no paragraph break. This really discourages one from reading. So use space meaningfully. Space out your work. This even encourages the mind or the eyes to read. So probably you could do main points that are larger than the rest, or you could foreground your subtopics. Use space meaningfully when you're taking down notes. Another way is to use abbreviations. When you're doing your notes, now remember, you're trying to condense probably the lecturer's notes. Use abbreviations that are meaningful for you. This will save a lot of time, and they can even work as memory aids. Some people are able to remember these abbreviations. So do the abbreviations. So for larger names, you can abbreviate them. Again, don't take in everything. Focus on the main points. And then think while you write. Remember, we've said studying means you are using your cognitive abilities to reflect, to ponder, to contemplate on what even you're writing. As you write, think. This helps you to understand the material. So that once it comes to the exam, you are not just reduplicating your lecturer's notes, but you can even paraphrase it. Remember, we said it's important that you can understand and even put it in your own words. When we mark work, it looks like it's rehearsed. Everybody writes it the same way, exactly the way the notes are. That shows mostly that material is crammed. So think while you write. It helps you understand. Remember, we said studying, the end result for studying is to learn. So this will help you learn. Visual elements again. So when we changing now the texts, you can use creativity and imagination to do visuals, e.g. sketch a diagram or do an illustration if you are a visual person. Again, as you make your notes, cite your sources. Mostly we ask you to cite your sources when you're doing research or your takeaway assignments. But even as you do your notes, cite your sources. Citing sources would mean you are writing from whose work it is that you're writing down. So, for example, in CCS we'll have maybe Mugenda, then you put the year. So cite your sources even as you write down your notes. Why? In case you need to read more about the subject, you will have the source where you can read further from. So if a lecturer cites a source, you could also take it down so that you can go deeper into the source material. I think this citing of sources will be discussed further when we do referencing and plagiarism, I think later in the course. Number your pages. These are a way to organize your notes. Number your pages. It helps you navigate through your notes, especially if you're using full scarps. You may need to number them so that you know how your notes follow each other. Write down questions. I've kept insisting about self-testing. So even as you write down notes, you could put in questions at the end. These are questions that once you can answer them, they will mean you have understood the content. So another way to keep your brain in gear as you take notes is to write down questions as you think of them. So although some traditional lecturers may not field questions until the end of the lecture, and it's very hard for you now to remember them because they're given at the end, you can write down the question so that even you ask what you want clarification about. And then it's a way to pay attention. It's a way to pay attention or to stay engaged in the lecture. And also, you'll have something to follow up after the class with your lecturer or professor, in case you did not understand. So write down questions, even as we listen in on lectures. Some people argue that if you type notes, some of us type notes instead of handwriting them. Some people recommend you handwrite and then you type. Because as you handwrite your notes, it aids in memory and recall. Although now the problem with handwritten notes is that they are not easily searchable. For example, if you want to search for something in your handwritten notes, it would mean you'll have to go page by page. If you're looking for a particular figure or source, you'll have to go page by page, maybe paragraph by paragraph looking for it. But if you had digital notes, you just need to search in the word and it would be given to you. So handwriting, they argue, helps in memory and recall. So they argue that notes that you have handwritten can easily be recalled as compared to notes that you type. But they argue for ease of use later, you can handwrite and then type later. I don't know how possible this is. I don't know whether we have enough time, a semester to handwrite and then type. Because now it would be easier to access the notes and even share. But so handwriting then typing if you want the best for both worlds. Now let us look at how to digitize, how to organize digital notes. Again, we have Wi-Fi on campus. And we have a lot of note-taking apps. So these apps can help us to do digital notes. If you know your IT savvy, you could probably want to consider going in this direction. So you look for an app, and this app should be able to create folders. Some apps can create folders, even subfolders, like the folders could be on certain units, the subfolders could be on certain topics. Some apps even have an optical character recognition. So this is where you just scan your handwritten notes and it's able to recognize that. Some apps, so look for an app that allows you to create folders and subfolders. It also allows you to use tags. So tags would mean, for example, if you're in linguistics and you're doing literature and you have you're handling different, maybe say texts, like probably you're doing Ngugi wa Thiong'o, you're doing Chinua Achebe. You could even tag like a theme, even like a theme of corruption is evident in the different texts that you're reading. You could put a tag on this. Then once you search theme of corruption, the app will bring you all the notes that have deal with the theme of corruption. So this would be very helpful. So look for an app that allows you to tag different topics or features. And then some people use color codes. Some people are very good with color, where they'll do, maybe you pick red for chemistry, blue for linguistics, etc. So some apps allow you to code, or you could even color code depending on topic. This one, I've already talked about it. It's very important, where you can scan your handwritten notes and you get it digital. So consider this. If you're IT savvy, you could digitize your notes. You could consider digitizing your notes. This will help you study or retrieve them more easily. Now, I am winding up. So another objective that we were supposed to look at was another subtopic was handling exams. That by the end of the lecture, you should be able to prepare and take exams efficiently. I think we've already given you ways to prepare for exam, because if you're studying or if you're using these study skills, if you've organized your notes properly, if you have formed productive study groups, all those are ways to prepare for exam. You are studying throughout the semester means you do not have to cram the last minute. So those are basically examination strategies. And I've insisted on self-testing, that even as you prepare your summaries, you're writing down questions at the end and looking to see if you can answer these questions. That helps you, because if you can answer a question, then if it finds its way into the exam, you'll be able to handle it without any issue. So those are examination strategies, preparing for exams. And I've said this is a teach for life skill rather than a teach for exam. What we are learning in CCS 101 should be embraced in our studies. So, examination strategies, you can refer to the study skills, strategies, and what works for you. So self-testing. But now, how do we now do the exam? What would be a strategy for taking the exam? Often when we give questions, especially the essay questions, which will be tackled later, sometimes you find that learners have not covered the full expectation of the question. The full expectation of the question. For example, the question had two parts, maybe cause and effects, and only what was covered was cause, and effects was ignored. So the Royal Literary Fund developed a black, red, green method. This is where you underline the expectations of the question, especially in essay questions. So you underline the relevant part of the question using the three separate colors. Black will denote blatant instruction. This is something that must be done. A directive or obvious instruction. Red is a reference point. For example, where you are required to bring in input of some kind, such as definitions, terms, or if you're required to cite others, or theory, using a theory, for example. So this would be underlined in red because a reference material is required. Then green would be used to stand for the grimmings. These are subtle signals, signals that are so subtly put that you could easily miss them out. So you underline the question and the requirement so that you answer it fully, so that you are able to score the highest point. So another method to tackle exam is the PEE, P then double E. This is where you give the point, you give the evidence, and you explain the three steps. The three steps. For example, there's an assignment where you are asked, like for example, what considerations went into the, like if I said you are in charge of communication at Embu University, what factors came into play when determining how to send out the invitation to first years or the information about admission to first years? if you're asked to answer that question, that would mean you would need to use the PEE, where you give the point, for example, the message, the nature of this message. So that is giving the point. Then you give the evidence. For example, talk about that the message, an admission message, requires or has a lot of details. And this cannot be sent out maybe in a text, or you cannot call every person and give all the requirements for admission. So now you're giving the evidence and then you explain. So probably the best choice for this form of communication would be an email, because an email will allow us to include all these details that are required. So in such a question, you'd give the point, you give the evidence, and then you explain. And this is basically what is required for most of the exams, the 3 steps in answering exam. So I think I've come to the end of today's lecture. Probably we are a bit early today because ordinarily we would stop at 8:30. But I want you to determine what is your learning style. Learning style is important that we identify what is our learning style. And here is a representation of the various learning styles. So this is a spatial learner or a visual. This one learns well by seeing. A visual or spatial learner. So this one would work well with diagrams or with illustrations or with mind maps. This one is an auditory learner, or so-called musical. These are the kind of people, even listening in on a lecture is enough for them to learn. So they do well with listening or auditory. Then this one is a logical learner. This works very well with people who do mathematics. Then we have the intrapersonal. This one is a loner, is a lone learner. He likes to learn on his own. Interpersonal does well in groups. Now let us look at the definition in the final slides. So which is your learning style? Because I've sorry, I lost my connection. So finally, so the kinesthetic learners are all about doing things physically. This one, they learn through role play. For example, writing it down on flashcards or even doing the physical activity, probably those who are in science and even in IT, things like that. So the other ones are verbal or linguistics learners. These ones respond well to written or spoken words. Now, these ones are the ones who mnemonics and acronyms would work well to aid their learning. And then we have logical or mathematical learners. This one, they use logic and structure. This one would be good with statistics, or they would even be able to do do like the spider webs, where one lead leads to another logically. And then we have solitary or intrapersonal learners. They work best alone. They make notes and recite them back, studying by themselves. And then finally, we have the interpersonal learners. So these ones work well in a group. So find out which is your learning style and then embrace the study strategy that works best for you. I want to challenge us that we should study throughout our semester and not just wait for the exam to cram. And this should improve on our performance. So thank you so much for listening in. I think I've come to the end of my lecture. I can see quite a number of lecturers online. I don't know whether anyone would be interested in saying something. You could cue me. Dr. Omoke. So it looks like either we are having a problem or nobody wished to speak. So if no one has something to say, then I wish to end there and let you go to your tutorials. Thank you very much for listening in. Sorry about the network issue, especially at the end. Thank you.